Good morning. Good morning, Richard, Danny. Nice to have you both with us.
Hey, Matt. Good to be here.
Great to be here.
We will take just a minute to let everybody settle in here, but this is the Navigating the Hybrid Work Security Landscape webinar with Richard and Danny, who I'll introduce further in a second. How's it on the...
We're spanning a few time zones today. I've got my tea.
Yes. I'm past my 2 cups of coffee already. Onto some
there you go.
Clear water.
Yeah. It's early on the coast. So you guys are running a little hotter than we are, I imagine. We've got the smoke, but you guys have got the heat.
We did just set a new record here in Minnesota, which is where Recast is headquartered out of. Broke a record 2 days ago. For this late
these are not records we wanted to break.
No, I'm with you.
I'm at a ball of
2 point was 77.
So I'm not gonna say anything.
Yeah. All right, we won't dig into the meat quite yet, but let me cover a couple things before we get going, a few items. For those of you joining us today, you'll notice on your screen that we have a few items for you to download right from your screen here. You can peruse the interface in front of you for that. You also have a couple ways to interact with us during the webinar. One is a chat feature for you to interact with everybody here. Second is a Q&A section. Feel free to please add any questions as they arise. We will try to weave questions into the conversation when possible. If they don't fit or we don't get to them during that part of the conversation, we will definitely get to them at the end with as much, see how much time we have there to get to as many as possible. At the very end, we'll also have a giveaway for four $100 gift cards to our Recast merchandise store. Stay tuned at the end for more information about that. As for our presenters today, we have with us Richard Campbell. He is a Microsoft MVP. He's an advisor, creator, and MVP for 19 years and running. He was the co-founder of Strange Loop Networks, which was acquired by Radware back in 2013, which is a decade ago. I'm sure that's a little shocking to hear, Richard. Huh?
Yeah, disturbing.
And, he's also was on the board of directors for Telerik, which was acquired by Progress Software in 2014. Today, he consults and advises to several technology firms. He also hosts 3 podcasts, .NET Rocks, Windows Weekly, and RunAs Radio. In addition to all of that, he is the founder and chairman of Humanitarian Toolbox, which is a public charity that builds open source software for disaster relief. Richard, we're thankful to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. And then secondly, we have Danny Wheeler. Danny is the director of IT here at Recast Software. He's previously held multiple IT manager roles in the public sector, specifically in government and public utilities. He has certifications in AWS, Azure, and COVID 2019 Foundation. Recently here at Recast Software, he's spearheaded the SOC 2 Type 1 compliance, which we've received, and he's moving on to the SOC 2 Type 2 audit, which is currently in progress, which we're very excited about. Glad you could be with us, Danny.
Yeah, no problem. I hope to one day have the resume of Richard.
It's a pretty fun resume to read, I must say, Richard. I like it.
I've learned to harness my ADD for the forces of good.
For our agenda today, we'll dig into the conversation here real quickly. Once we're done, as I already mentioned, we'll have our Q&A section. We should have 5 to 10 minutes for that, hopefully. And a little brief blurb about Recast at the end before our giveaway when we sign off. And we expect this to be right around an hour. Looking forward to it. So let's dive right in. So let's set the stage for this security conversation here. What are some of the core risks today, 2023, without security best practices in place? Why are we here? Why are we focusing on this theme today?
Well, I think that black hats are doing pretty well these days. Ransomware has become very profitable and a bit of an effective strategy for folks that don't want to do real work, and so just take advantage of any vulnerability you can find. That being said, I think we are doing a little bit better these days, but the supply chain breaches, these kinds of attacks, certainly through COVID, we saw the bad guys demonstrating just what it means to be a bad guy by attacking hospitals and healthcare centers just at the time when they were under the most stress. But we're coming out of the pandemic, and I think we disrupted it a little. We were pushed to, as IT folks, disrupt an awful lot of our own infrastructure. Everybody had to go home. Like, the perimeter got exploded. And now we're kind of dealing with cleaning that up and trying to work in the modern world with more cloud, more remote work, and sometimes they're in, sometimes they're out. I think it's really complicated.
With the modern security risks that we have, new insurance requirements, state actors, instability in the world, I think, it's easy for us to get lost in all of the goings on. But at the end of the day, the guys that are doing the bad stuff are going to do the bad stuff, and they're going to take advantage of any of these little flare-ups or things that happen where attention's taken away from some of the things that we've kind of been teaching ourselves since the pandemic to do bad stuff. So it's really incumbent on us to really keep an eye on the prize when it comes to cybersecurity.
I do feel like that landscape's changing a bit, Danny. This is a show we did recently on RunAs where we talked about the fact that we're getting better at dealing with phishing. Not so much that humans are becoming less fallible, like that's not a thing, but the push towards MFA, which I think partly had to do with the requirements around cybersecurity insurance, actually meant that those exploits weren't working there as well. And now it seems like the black hats are targeting unpatched servers more. They are getting more success over there than they are getting from the phishing attack. So, I mean, I call that a win for us that we've actually moved those numbers, but it's changed the conversation on trying to patch servers faster, taking the risk that you get a bad patch versus getting exploited because you didn't patch quickly.
Absolutely. MFA, I feel like, the last couple of conferences that I've gone to, especially in the public sector, has been the number one topic. And I think that's, obviously a big deal, but, from our perspective, we had to deal with, some pretty serious state actors attacking, various facilities, lots of issues like that. So I think, it's kind of funny how the black hats will kind of distract you over here while they're doing something over here. It's really common to see, when one particular outbreak happens, you'll see something else somewhere else pop up on the radar.
Yeah, they're just trying to find the easy. If they wanted to work hard, they wouldn't be thieves. So they're trying to find the easiest way path forward. And at the moment, that seems to be shifting a bit. But it's one of the truths I think already as a sysadmin, I'm sure you've been up against this. Like, we have to be right every time. They only have to be right once.
You have to be right every time in a bunch of different areas, because as soon as you take your eye off the ball on one area to focus on, say, malware or ransomware, the next thing you know, you've got some other more sophisticated attack happening on the backside because somebody had admin privileges they shouldn't have had.
Yeah, classic.
That's a good seg here. Let's step back for a moment before we look forward or dig deeper into today. Before the pandemic, where were the discussions at, both internally and within industries, around best practice and zero trust? Where did things stand pre-pandemic?
I mean, we were talking about zero trust for years because it really goes hand in hand with cloud. Generally speaking, cloud infrastructure requires a zero trust model. If you're only using SaaS, it wasn't that big a deal. But as we were getting more into the platform plays where we had some stuff on-prem, some stuff in the cloud, and we were trying to interact with them, you were bumping into all kinds of security issues. But a lot of folks weren't that worried about it. I like most hip terms in technology, it had that, I call it the spray bottle effect. Like, eventually people think, well, I'll just squirt some zero trust on this, everything will be fine. And eventually folks just to kind of ignore it and keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I think from our perspective in the internal IT world, zero trust was something that we were all somewhat aware of. Maybe it was a nebulous concept that meant different things to different people, but it was it was usually accompanied with, some vendor language that didn't make sense to us or what have you, or we were just so busy we really didn't have the time to look at what zero trust really meant. We knew that it wasn't good to have an administrator privilege on the desktop, but especially in the public sector, we had so many programs that required it that it just, we really didn't have that catalyst that we wanted or needed to really push us in any direction, much less, remove it. Obviously, users kind of pushed that to us. You didn't want to make somebody upset for not being able to open up the program that they needed to use or install an audio driver or what have you.
In the end, let's face it, like this is not necessarily an initiative that a sysadmin will want to take on or will kick off. This tends to come top down. We're going to have enough security, right? Like Zero Trust lives in this funny world where you need business support to pull it off, to even go down that path. So should they be initiating, or should we be pushing to them to say, hey, we want the resources and the time and the change in behavior that's going to necessitate it allow this to be successful? I think it often gets trapped between the director of IT and the CFO.
Absolutely. And a lot of times it was a okay for thee, but not for me kind of scenario where everybody was okay to have admin access, but wanted everybody else to not have it. So I think, what it comes down to is a culture of security that IT really needs to be pushing, not just from the internal operational side, but from a business perspective. And from us at the time, especially when the pandemic happened, I was in public sector. There was a lot of cases where, we just didn't have a seat at the table and couldn't, really impress upon executive management that zero trust and removing, administrative access and trusting, verification really was that important. But, obviously the pandemic changes a lot of things. Well, that and malware, both of those change things.
It's not that bad. Not that malware got better, but the pandemic certainly changed things.
Absolutely. It just wasn't on our radar. I mean, we knew malware was an issue. Lots of us had malware breaches, but, software development even had an issue with, requesting elevated privileges. So, from our perspective, it was just so difficult to get in front of the people that would help us support the decisions that we needed them to make to kind of have the impetus to do the things that we needed to do.
So go ahead.
I'll jump in.
I was going to start talking.
Yep. Pandemic hits at this point. How the pandemic changed the conversation around security. Let's relive that moment in the following months for you both with your experiences.
Well, Danny hit on the big one to me. It's certainly something that I talked about immediately on the show when I was talking to sysadmins, which is all of a sudden you were sitting with the business leaders and they're saying, we're going to be okay, right? You could do this. You're going to be able to push everybody home. I talked to companies that had done a pilot of 30 VPN seats, and now they need to do it for all 3,000. Like, they'll just turn up the knob. It'll be fine. It was a bit of a panic.
It was a panic, and the really interesting thing about it was wasn't the first questions that were asked. It was all operational. Can we get people to be able to log in to work without disrupting productivity, without making people less safe? And of course, in our IT manager and IT director minds, that meant, okay, now we have to ramp up VPN or we have to ramp up our cloud initiatives. But in our minds, that meant security. So getting that seat at the table was a big deal, because now we could say, yes, we can do that, or it's going to take this much, or here's the things we're going to have to do, but we need to do this secure. And we needed to make sure that it was done in such a way that we weren't, endangering either people or organizational resources or really anything. So it was really funny how they said, can you do it? Can it be done? And then it was still relying on us to say, yes, but we need to do it securely.
Yeah, I found there was lots of folks who was like, the security strategy had been no remote work. And now that wasn't an option. And so they're, okay, well, now that they have to remotely work, well, what would you do? What's possible? And, Satya Nadella said two years of cloud migration happened in 2 months. One of the choices was, let's just ship these workloads up as fast as you could go. The whole VPN play came into, here's an app that isn't going to run in the cloud very easily. It's bound to servers inside the office. Only certain people need to use it, so maybe we'll figure it out for them. Like I found the stratification of the application landscape got really interesting, where what could have been SaaS maybe was being piloted. You just SaaSed it. It's fine. That's good. You know, that already works in the cloud. That'll work remote. No big deal. Change some security privileges around a little bit. Common workloads like your spreadsheets, documents, those kinds of things. Yeah, you shove those to the cloud as quick as you can with shared storage. But it was the custom apps. And boy, you talk about challenges. Like some apps just don't work well when they're not in the same network. When their security won't transition some boundaries. Like there were problem children in every office that I talked to.
I couldn't agree more. And not just problems around, because you had so many different aspects that you had to tackle, line of business applications, things that didn't work over VPN. I don't know if I speak for all IT managers, but I've hated VPN for years, right? Because it's just always something that you have to deal with. And it's always tied to either, a piece of equipment or a particular vendor solution. There was the issue with identity. How did you manage identity, especially in a full remote workforce? Recast, I'm very fortunate here. We've been a remote first company. Identity is kind of built that way, but when you're working in a city government, that's just not built for that. So how do you expand that perimeter? How do you push the boundaries of what your IT department could do, just from the perspective of an identity management? And how can you now you've got VPN and chicken egg scenarios. I got to log into the VPN to authenticate to AD, but I can't get to AD because I'm not on the VPN. So this stuff happened so quickly within a couple of weeks, and most of us were overwhelmed. And even when we got the seat at the table, we didn't know what to ask for.
Yeah, mostly it was money. Right? I need to get some gear in. I need to change some things around. We need to sign these accounts. I think security took a backseat to a lot of that. Like, it feels to me now, especially this past year, as we're kind of coming out of it, where folks are looking around and just sort of looking at the wreckage on the battlefield of just trying to get through all of this and saying, well, how do we clean some of this up? What do we put to bed? I think for a long time, there's also belief that this will pass quickly and we'll go back to where we were. And now it's apparent to me, and I think most folks, is like there is no going back. We're only going forward. People's viewpoints on these situations have changed. A lot of folks don't want to be in the office full time anymore. They moved further away. It's not even practical for them to be in the office anymore. And so there's only a new normal, whatever that looks like.
Well, and I think it's a little bit of both, right? Because we have some companies, like Recast is one of them, that has made a commitment to be remote and to stay that way. But there's also other larger organizations that are coming back to the office. And now their issue is, hey, we've implemented all of these solutions that are super remote focused, and now we're coming back in. We really need a solution that's pretty versatile. So I think, just depending on your organization and how your operations work, I think IT departments are really struggling with this push-pull, very up and down nature of, okay, now we're in the office, now we're not, now we need to be hybrid. And I think they're all just really jonesing for some sort of a solution that kind of works with both. And, it's just one of those things that we struggled with in the public sector for sure, because we had public safety and public utilities that couldn't go home. These guys turned wrenches, and they were in the office. And then we had people who, like me, who could probably do most of their job from home. So, that versatility is really hard, and it makes it even more difficult to implement zero trust. But at the end of the day, the first thing you want to do is make sure that, you have got a correct setup for least privilege access. And getting administrators off the desktop was job number one.
Yeah, it was interesting how many sysadmins couldn't go home. Like an awful lot of their work was bound to the immediate network, and they put restrictions in place to make it impossible. So they were the ones still in the office to some degree. And then we got 2 weeks. I got 2 weeks of respite. Well, and that was what did you need? What did you have to change, right? And it was getting the line workers working was what you had to get working. Your stuff could come second. Like making you and your team suffer was fine compared to the X many people you have working in your organization that need to be productive.
Paychecks people had to get paid, and people obviously in the middle of a pandemic being able to get to things like, your HRIS to look at health coverage. Those things are really important. How do you do that in an identity that's stretched across a perimeter? It was hairy there for a while.
And it's great to have you describe it that way too, Danny, just because I realized, like, I wrote those in case-up docs back in the day. It's like, what if the building burns down? Like, what do we do? In some ways, the pandemic was that kind of disaster. Like, what if you couldn't use the office? What would you do? I don't know that any of us wrote that scenario.
And it's the really funny part about it, or not funny, but interesting part to me was, a plan is just sometimes a list of things that don't happen, right? And one of the things that we ran into was the contingencies that we had, the plans that we had, the disaster recovery plans that we had, didn't call for, they just didn't fit a lot of those molds, right?
Yeah.
It says something to the way we wrote disaster recovery planning, but at the same time, sometimes the answer was, here, take this router, here, take your computer, box it up, go home, we'll see you in a month. And, that's just not part of most of our planning. So it was very,
when I say month, it turned out I meant 2 years. Like, who knew? Oh, and possibly forever.
Exactly. Nobody knew how long it was going to last. And then now that, we kind of consider the pandemic in large part over, we all expected that we would just stay this way, and things are just as you would expect. Business is doing what business does and decides what's good for it. And now we have, like, Recast, we're all remote, but I have, I have friends in large organizations. They're like, it's almost like this didn't happen, so we're all coming back into the office. So now you've got a perimeter that's stretched out. But and people that are used to that type of accessibility, but now they're coming back into the office. So now it's just, it's one of those things where you have to, like, kind of roll with the punches as an IT department, and have really good relationships with the executives and the finance side.
Yeah, different companies certainly have different experiences too. I also think that now the leadership is looking and saying, like, what does the conversation look like now? Or they're again, your mileage will vary, but it's like some folks are still at the table having that weekly meeting or that monthly meeting with leadership talking about infrastructure. And it's like, are these conversations still necessary? What do we need to do? How do you stay engaged with it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess really, if there is an upside to the insurance side, it's that insurance drives a lot of what we do in cybersecurity, right? Because if you can't get insured, that's an issue on the business. And from our perspective,
like that externalization.
It takes some of the onus off of you as a leader, right?
Yeah. Well, it's I never got to be a full-time security person. I was always the general IT person, or focused on a particular area. I had to put my tinfoil hat on once in a while, and it's funny how folks would just ignore you on that day. It's like, oh, you're having a crazy day again, are you? And so when we started dealing with cybersecurity insurance policies, that was this external force that said, hey, if we want to be protected by the risk of this, we have to follow these procedures. I'm disturbed by the number of CFOs signing insurance agreements that have IT stipulations in it, like MFA, and the company's not even tried to comply with it. It's like, this policy's void, right? Like, if we actually have a breach, the first thing you're going to look at is like, you didn't follow the requirements of this policy. You're not getting anything from us.
Right. Or you said you had it, but you didn't. Right.
Right.
And
you just checked the box.
In the government space, we call those unfunded mandates, right? You have to do this, but we're not giving you any more money. And we've had that happen before, where something was signed that said we had X, we did not have X, and then when we called out later, just by luck, we happened to read what was signed and said, we don't have that. They're like, well, how quickly can you get it? And that's better, I guess. We would prefer as IT leaders to drive that conversation and to be a little bit more proactive, and say, hey, look, this is the roadmap. Here's where we want to go, and let that drive the dollar spent. Not, hey, we told this insurance company we had the thing and we don't have the thing, and now we have to buy the thing.
Well, it's not like we told somebody who signed that agreement said so. Whether they ever checked with somebody qualified to identify whether we actually had those things, that's a separate issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think things that this comes back to is as an IT manager or leader, it's really important for us to be able to speak the language on the business side and to build those relationships. And those of us that did get seats at the table during the pandemic, you need to hold on to those seats with everything you can. And you do that by demonstrating value and connecting what we do in the IT world with things like, revenue and productivity and being able to talk that talk. And it's so important for us as leaders to be able to, to foster those relationships and show that value to executive management.
I've certainly had talked to folks who said, like, one of the things that came out of the pandemic crisis was, I know more about how my company makes money. I know what the cost of downtime is now. And you can use those ROI numbers to say, look, if we have a breach, it's going to take 3 to 6 months to recover. These are the things that are going to be broken. Here's our impact on productivity. Like, you can carve a budget out of that to say, we can do a better job of protecting this with a smaller amount of money. But it's good to speak that language, because if you get able to describe it to a CFO in number terms, you have a better chance of getting budget for it.
To me, it was a really interesting thing that, when I was working in the public sector, we didn't have, productivity and revenue per se, but it was put to us in different terms, right? We had to put this to our management in different terms. Like, we need to be able to respond when there are emergencies. We need to be able to, still issue permits. There's certain things that city governments, state governments, and public utilities need to be able to make sure water keeps flowing. That's the language of our productivity, and being able to put that into a scenario where, hey, if this doesn't happen, this many residents lose a valuable service, that helps too, right? Because I think a lot of people who might watch this webinar are in the public sector, and that's a different language, but it's still fundamentally is based on the organization's ability to deliver whatever services it's providing.
It's still customers, they're still providing value, but I really appreciate that difference of, oh no, we keep the water flowing in the city, pretty important, as opposed to, a lot of work I did where it's like, we keep the e-commerce side up. Both have metrics, but they are different purposes.
Let's talk cloud for a minute here. What's been the impact of moving to the cloud on security and best practice around it?
I mean, it's not like our internal infrastructure went away. I've always been really interested in the gateway drugs of cloud. Like, what's the first product you buy? I came from large scale spaces where it's like, we wanted to retire the secondary data center, or maybe cloud could be the DR solution for the secondary data center. I've also seen folks where it's like, they wanted a superior CRM product. And so rather than having to provision all that internally, to move that to a SaaS product was cool, bit by bit. But I think we said this right off the bat, like, all cloud is essentially running in zero trust models. Like, it's a different security perimeter. As long as it's an isolated product, that's fine. It gets a lot more complicated when it's interlaced with your own infrastructure.
I love the terms, the gateway drug of cloud. You're so right. CRMs, ERPs are the first things to get cloudified. And, and of course, from the IT side, we are looking at, I learned really early that I would love to not be in the data center business. However, I can make that happen. And so we would use CRM or ERP or, when Office 365 came along, line of business apps, to be our little business segue. Hey, how we're doing it with this, it would be even better if we did it with this, right? And that, speaking that language of trying to, get more out of your data center, get it to somebody who's obviously doing a great job. Microsoft is one of those companies with Azure and AWS as well. Hey, look, we can get out of this data center business. But once again, that changes your perimeter, right?
When you talk about different language too, the conversation with the CFO of a capital expenditure versus an operating expenditure, like, where I saw the cloud conversations coming up is when I was drawing out the plans for a 2 number hardware replacement into a data center, because all that stuff's out of warranty. The extended warranties don't make sense. The new gear is going to give us more yield. I'm provisioning for peak. So it's like, I need to do a giant buy. And the CFO would say, could we get some cloud instead? Like, now you could rethink the model and say, well, okay, what does that same 5-year period look like in a cloud implementation and in an expense model? Of course, it's all speculative measures, and I thought our math was always questionable, but it's certainly, from an implementation point of view, part of that was just the security complexities on that, what that even looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. We used to, my favorite term was budgetability, and I used to talk about the 5-year pop, right? Because every 5 years we were buying new hardware, and we were going to have to plan for that. And there would be some eye-popping number, and, it wouldn't be necessarily a CFO signing off on it. It would be a city or a council or a commissioner's court or directors. And the idea that we could take not just our infrastructure, but our security products and turn them into an OpEx expenditure that was budgetable. And it was much more stable and able to be forecast better was a huge win for us. And I think, the naysayers will say, well, then you're paying for it forever. Well, you're paying for it forever anyway, right? It's just,
you always were. That's always been true.
Pop.
Yeah. And it's smoothing that out. But I think the other side of this, it's certainly been a topic over and over again on RunAs, is like we were used to provisioning for the peak in that 5-year period. Like you're making a guess as to how much compute you were going to need in the worst case scenario. And the cloud model allows us to only utilize what we need at the time. It's a whole bunch of new thinking. Like it is a challenge to calibrate yourself to what we need to utilize. But now it turns into monthly expenditure. So you can certainly tune and tweak that stuff better. Yeah.
And, to the original question, what's the impact of moving to the cloud on our security policies? Obviously, having just gone through a SOC 2 exercise, we're dealing a lot more with BYOD. We're dealing a lot more with, acceptable use and machines that are no longer on, technically on a VPN or a security perimeter. So, we're having to educate our workforce a lot more on zero trust, obviously, and being able to modify our own policies, because at the end of the day, your security culture does get driven a lot by the policies you put in place. And for us, it's, since we're a cloud-based company, when it comes to operations, for the most part, it really does affect your security policies and how you approach security in general. So for us, it wasn't a complete retool for me coming from the public sector, but it was a big change.
Yeah.
Danny, have you had any recent conversations at Recast in terms of cost controls, VMs, just in terms of on-the-ground experience and conversations that are happening today?
Yeah, we have those conversations quite a bit from the security side, cost side, operational side, just from all sides. We obviously, the elasticity of having the cloud and having the security that's kind of baked into services like Azure really helps. But we also know that, there is that cost can be, if you obviously have to pay a lot more attention to cloud-based resources, right? Costs can get out of hand if you're not really careful. So the conversations that we have are, is it need-based? How long are we going to use it? How do we scale it? How do we size it? And then, would it make more sense for it to be, possibly not in the cloud? We develop for on-premise products, so we do have some on-premise resources. So every time we spin up something, we do have that conversation. Can we do this in the cloud, or should we do it on-prem? So our perimeter can change a little bit, be a little elastic that way too. And we have those every day almost, it seems like. And how does it fit into our current security policies?
And it is that reminder that hybrid is the new normal, right? I really appreciate your point. It's like not everything should be in the cloud. And I think more and more people are recognizing this infrastructure, these bits run better on-prem in this office or with this group of people. These bits run better over there. And this idea that we're just going to migrate everything to one place, like all these absolutes are invariably wrong. There's always shades of gray between any of these things. You're going to have some stuff here, some stuff there. You got to make it all work together.
Sticker shock is a real thing. I mean, it really is. And being able to forecast, once again, calling back to the business side of the conversations, being able to forecast those costs properly and not, handing your CFO a surprise cloud bill that was, 30, 40, 100% more than you thought is a really important thing. We typically look at those, obviously from a business perspective, we value, the ability to do things cloud side, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's not the right setting for everything. And having security solutions that can cater to both on-premises resources and to cloud resources is vital. And that's, one of the things that we love about our product.
And you turn your 5-year POP into a monthly POP.
Yeah, that monthly POP is bad.
So now you kind of wanted like a mid-month to know, hey, we're going to have some excitement at the end of the month. Like there's tooling for that. But
yeah, we've had a scenario where we have handed somebody a projected cost for a particular resource that dwarfed the on-premises cost. And no matter what you say about the gadgets and the cool technology, it's hard to overcome that.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Let's get a little further into the weeds here. You guys have both referenced that Zero Trust is more than MFA. So what challenging or more challenging security strategies need to be implemented to action Zero Trust?
Well, the fun part, of course, is there's a bunch of things we should have done even before they came up with the buzzword Zero Trust and this movement, the cloud part, just least privilege. This idea that way too many folks, including sysadmins, are walking around with administrator rights.
Yes, and coming from the public sector, it seems like it's a little bit more rife there because a lot of these are legacy products. Public sector is typically a little bit slower to adopt new technologies. They will get more mileage out of software that they've purchased. And to be quite fair and honest, the software manufacturers in that space tend to take advantage of that, right? So, we had CRMs and ERPs that required admin access on desktops. It's all fine. It's all fine to say least privilege, but I think what a challenging and gritty issue that we had was communicating with the software developers and the people that chose software in our environments. That look, we need to be thinking about this from a security perspective. Can we use least privilege with this software? And if we can't, should that be a deal killer? And that did. So I think one of our biggest challenges was that culture and that idea that we need to architect some of the business around the fact that security is a thing that is here to stay.
Yeah, I guess this question is like on the RFP, generally the only thing it says about security is software will be secure, not that the software will not require administrator rights. Like I wonder if we have to write our RFPs better.
Their favorite one was, Active Directory. Can it do Active Directory? That's not enough.
Yeah. Especially today. I mean, it's just more complicated than that anyway. But certainly, it's cutting down on rights. We got to talk about developers though, because you said that your internal software is a problem too. Because most developers don't want to think about security. They just give me all the privileges in the world while I build this. Don't worry, we'll dial it down later.
Absolutely. And I'll brag on Recast, for a moment here. We have some fantastic people working here and, secure code training, secure code testing. Those are really big things here. We helped write the policies that required those, but to be honest, they were doing it before we wrote those policies. So, I think, being a software company ourselves, I get to see kind of how that sausage is made now coming from the public sector. And it's very interesting to me. But, I think a lot of the time, IT leaders don't ask those questions. And you mentioned RFPs a second ago. RFPs are an absolute beatdown. Like that's the last thing that most IT directors want to do. Oh, yeah. So they're looking for templates and things like that. Learn to write those RFPs, learn to put in the language that that your security policies and your posture are going to require. And, from our perspective, being SOC 2 compliant really kind of helps with that. But not everybody's doing that. And, asking those questions of your developers and asking your business folks to ask the questions too, and not relying on them to do it every time, it's a big thing. You need to make sure that you're asking the right questions to the right people.
And for the few times we actually get to select new software, you're also living with a suite of software that could be improved. Like being the squeaky wheel that pushes on that vendor to say, when are you going to decrease the privilege requirements on this application? Right? And I really like the ROI side of this is a high privilege application and it needs to be restricted in other ways. So we're spending money as an organization trying to protect the risk that this piece of software represents because it refuses to give up full admin rights. There's a cost there. The cost was always there, but you need to make it visible because that can put pressure to actually make the software better in later versions.
Yeah, and having some sort of software that allows you to work with least privilege, allows you to remove administrators' rights from your desktops, and also work with programs that might need elevated privileges is pretty key. At the end of the day, you may not be able to get your CFO to relinquish control of their, extremely old legacy ERP program that they love.
Yeah.
What do you do then? What's the next step? Well, the next step is to make sure that whatever software solution you're using to help you implement zero trust can handle bumps in the road like a particular program that's going to need to be elevated.
Every organization I've ever run into has at least one grumpy piece of software that's important to them, or at least important to some part of the company. And you can't just say no. It's be fun, but it's not realistic. You've got to find a strategy to try and deal with that. And there's a variety of them.
Cases. Sorry about that. Yeah, some cases you can't move because through consolidation, only one company makes that thing, right? Only one company makes that software. We ran into that a lot in the public sector, and then everybody in the entire organization can hate that software, and it doesn't matter because you can't go anywhere else. So you have to work around that problem, and that requires
better or worse.
Yeah. For better or worse, or we'll go to company B. Well, company A just bought company B, so that consolidation hurts. And being able to use having software that can roll with those punches is very key.
I do dig into the side, and it's been an ongoing theme on the show about really getting started going down this path. I don't know how you feel about this, Danny, but I like the approach that let's start with the sysadmins themselves. Like this, getting out of the habit of living in an administrator account, like be a domain user most of the time. So at least you live like everyone else lives in the organization, and then using that just enough administration that you elevate yourself for a task and then go back down to domain. I don't know how we convince others to do this properly if we don't do it ourselves as admins.
I could not agree more, and not only do I agree with it, but that's what we implement in Recast. We don't have admin privileges even on our desktops as IT folks. I am the same as somebody in sales, as somebody in the human resources department, or somebody in the developer side. We don't get admin privileges. I agree completely with you. It's hard to make the case that this is an important thing to your organization when the people whose accounts can do the most damage are the ones that are not using some sort of least privilege strategy. So I agree.
Let's face it, the black hats are targeting us for a reason, because we often have more privilege, and we also are mortal and can click on the wrong link or make a mistake of some kind. So it's reasonable to say, we're targets too. I push to leadership that way as well, because they're concerned about security. It's like, you've got to change your practices too. To get everyone on board is to show that the administrators are doing it, that the leadership is doing it, and arguably maybe doing it at a higher level. I like the fact that, the idea that sysadmins carry YubiKeys, they're actually working at a harder level of restriction than they expect domain users to do.
Absolutely. One of the things that we did, right off the bat, certainly in the public sector when we were doing zero trust, is get all of the people who would most likely be spearphished or had targets on their back, the elected officials or executives in the organizations, and say, hey, look, we're trying to create this culture. To create that culture, they need to see that you're no better than the next guy, and that you are willing to do the hard stuff. And, I think that's a really important piece. The second part of that is to not have a scenario where you've made it difficult to work. And that's why I keep coming back to the fact that if you're going to pick a solution to help you implement this, it needs to be something that's flexible enough to allow people to work, allow people to be productive, but at the same time, really, hammer down on those least privileged principles.
Yeah. And it helps to be able to say, congratulations, you're important enough to the organization that you're being targeted. And so now we actually have to go to an additional effort for you, because if your account is exploited, it has substantial impact to the organization.
Yeah, and if it's not just, hey, we think these folks can get in and do bad things with your account. It's, hey, even them sending an email with your name on it carries weight, right? If you have a county judge that it gets breached and they've got his email access, you'd be surprised at how many people will do whatever the email said without asking. So yeah, it's a really big deal for those folks more than anybody to have some sort of a security privilege limiting solution applied to them.
Yeah, and then the policies around just the right way that people ask for things, so that when the exploiters try and use this business compromise approach, they don't get anywhere because they don't follow the process.
Right, and yeah, will it increase your call volumes on the help desk side? It certainly could, but one of the things that I, as an IT director, talk about, and when we're talking about security culture, is that to me, security is top of mind and it's top of list. So in the small organizations, I used to say, hey, look, we want you calling the help desk when you have problems, but when it's a security thing, some sort of a breach, something you're not sure of, come directly and talk to me, right? Because we wanted to project the idea that security was the top level thing. And because of that, you got the express lane to whoever can answer the question quickly, because sometimes time is of the essence.
Yeah, security takes the priority. Now and more than just that phishing side of things. But once upon a time, people were annoyed by locks on doors too. It is a skill set. Like, eventually folks learn how to do this, and it's just part of your workflow. I've seen the same thing happen with development, on the .NET Rock side, where we've been talking about shifting left on security, where it's like, the same way you build out that CI/CD pipeline to make it quicker to build software, if you build in the security practice at the beginning, it becomes a routine part of your work, and you don't think about it anymore. The first little while is rough, but it passes.
Absolutely. It's when you build a house, you start with a good foundation, and you build things with as Stephen Covey used to put it, begin with the end in mind, right? And the end in mind I think for all of us as IT professionals is we need the most secure environment possible. So if you at least let security, or the idea of security, color every decision that you're making, from the hiring all the way to purchasing equipment, when it comes time to to really get into what you're doing, that security stuff's already been thought about. It's already baked in, and you're not having to retroactively refit something, which obviously takes a lot more time and can be even more distracting and productivity destroying than starting with the security to begin with.
Well, and ultimately they end up not doing it, or not doing a very good job of it, because it takes so much re-engineering to retrofit security well.
It certainly does. But it makes some vendors a lot of money, and sometimes that's a thing that that they rely on. I prefer to do it in the beginning, because that way, whenever those things come up, it's a little bit less work on my IT team. I'm used to working in lean teams. We start the process early. That way, we don't have to retrofit in the future.
But I do think surfacing this whole conversation into leadership, sort of talking about that ROI story, because it can't just be done by administrators, because everyone does need to participate in this. It is a larger initiative. I don't know that sysadmins are excited to do that. That's a hard piece of work, but it's rapidly becoming one of the most important problems in the space. And so you need all the help you can get.
Talk about whenever I would talk with other IT managers and they would say things about ROI, I don't try to discourage that, but I used to like to talk more about effect on revenue, right? EOR. And to me, we don't, as a lot of times ITs are cost centers, they're not necessarily revenue generating. We don't generate revenue, but mistakes that are made or improper strategies or what have you can certainly have an effect on revenue and income. So for sure, something that we should still have that seat at the table.
Let's get to a question. Well, at least one of the questions here, and I think you guys can see it on the side of your screen as well. But this question essentially has to do with external or removable devices. There's kind of 3 layers to the question by Anthony. Do you guys have any recommendations for insider threat or data loss prevention in terms of how to protect against removable storage devices like thumb drives or external hard drives, etc.? And then he kind of layers on, does MFA make sense with removable devices? Do you see customers worrying about this? I'll let you take it from there if you have any thoughts.
Well, from my perspective, the tools that we use, I won't get into too deeply, but I think it's important that you have some sort of an endpoint management tool that's going to address this. In our case, we just limit the use of USB drives. To be quite honest, it's not really impacting us too much because USB drives just aren't used that much anymore here. But any real external hard drives or anything like that, you need to have something that's, number one, going to scan that drive. And if you're going to allow access to it at all, and you need to have a policy in place that, backs up either you're scanning it, requiring that scan, or you're just denying access altogether. In our case, we will basically limit access to that drive, and then we will use our own product, which is Privilege Manager, to allow access to that drive should we decide that there's a good business reason to allow access to it. As far as
not
MFA,
just filling the drives with epoxy there, Danny?
No, I would get rid of all USB ports on all devices if I had a choice.
Well, and back in the day, it was a malware vector, right? Like C Stuxnet.
Absolutely.
I wasn't even worried about the exfiltration of data. I was worried about the infiltration of malware.
The Stuxnet reference is great, Richard. I don't have a whole lot of centrifuges that I got to worry about getting burned up, but certainly love the idea that we still think about Stuxnet because, I won't go into the stories, but too much, but or I'll try to protect the innocent or guilty. But there are certain security companies out there that will allow you to put, software on USB devices and sprinkle them around your campus and look to see who's plugging them in. And I literally know of multiple cities. Yeah, I know multiple cities that have increased their security funding. They've literally gotten more security funding because they sprinkled those in their parking lot. Nothing brings people to the table.
I'm stunned at how well that strategy
caught.
works.
It's I think it's how you name the file, right?
Yeah, totally. But to address Anthony's question, I mean, exfiltration is a problem, right? No two ways about it. And the perimeter blowout, moving anybody home, it's like effectively they've now got copies of that of the organization stuff in their home anyway. Like we have a bunch of problems here, and there's layers to how you can deal with it. I mean, you brought up the point about the policies around USB drives and other external media. Full stop. Like step one is using tools like group policy and the like to just say, hey, if one of these devices comes onto the network, do we know? Can we log it? And can we choose to have additional scrutiny around anything to do with that device, which is true. Comprehensive document security management is a challenging problem. And there are products made in this space. They're far from free, and they often will leave documents in an encrypted state until a licensed version of the software is applied to it to be able to read it. This is something Microsoft does with their with M365 and the secure modes, where even PDFs just can't be opened with. They can't talk to the cloud provider to authenticate that you're allowed to open that doc.
Yeah, and it goes farther than that, honestly. I think it's great to think about the technical solutions to technical challenges, but it does come back to policy in the business side. It's important that anybody as an IT leader gets with their business leaders on the business side and says, look, let's go through our data. Let's stratify this data. Let's classify it. And then let's have a policy that says this data has this tag. It's extremely sensitive. This data, medium, this data low, this data informational only. Without those policies in place and that classifying that data, you're just applying it to everything. And that's not a great strategy either. You really need to get to the business side.
Yeah, you're just impeding business.
Yeah, you're just impeding business. Oh, because you're telling me that I can't take my awesome carne asada recipe. I can't take that home. Well, I mean, no, but we don't want you exfiltrating data, sensitive code. We don't want you PII, all these other things, those things. And, we happen to use Azure for that, but there's a lot of things out there and they're all backed by policy.
Well, and part of doing that instrumentation on your infrastructure is to help you know what does the regular workflow look like? How often are USB drives and other removable storage showing up in the organization? You can, when that device appears on the network, say, all right, let's log everything that comes and goes from it, so at least you have a sense of what's moving around. Somebody's taking some work home because they just want to work late from home. It's hard to be terribly unhappy with that. You just got to know about it first. So, building up some data to have a landscape to know what the problem is.
Yep. Find if you can find some software that helps you with those analytics, that's fantastic. And it helps you with the stratification process of the data and classifying it as well.
Yeah. But, there are no simple solutions to controlling that data to that degree. And lots of leaders like to say we want to do that right up until you bring them the price tag for what it takes. And that's partly labor too, just people doing the work.
Right. But we talk a lot about least privileged access, right? Well, access to what? And how do you determine that privilege? The only way to determine those privileges and what and who gets access to what is to say, this data is important, this data is not. And if this data is important, these are where we're going to apply those least privilege access principles.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I'm going to jump in here quickly. Just a brief introduction to Recast Software. I know many of you on this call know us quite well already, but we are at Recast Software a dedicated group of sysadmins that love what we do in the IT community that we do it with. We work to empower organizations to better manage and support their users and devices. As you can see on the screen here, we're in over 125 countries with our software. We have over 70,000 community users using right-click tools community version per month, monthly, many much more often than that, of course. We have over 1,000 customers, active paying customers using our product suite. We are certainly a rapidly growing software company. I highly recommend checking out our website, and down at the bottom of the website, you can click the link to look at our Gartner Peer Insights reviews. It's really a good way to get a glimpse into how you, our users, are experiencing our product and what others are saying about our products. One quick poll question here, simple A/B. Would you like to see how Recast's Zero Trust solution helps overcome the challenges in your environment? I'll give you just 15, 20 seconds here to answer this question. Yes, if you want to see a little more about Privilege Manager, our PAM solution. Or no, why don't you do that? While I'm giving you a few seconds, I'll take this time to say thank you, Richard, Campbell, and Danny for joining us here. This was a great conversation. I know I enjoyed listening in on it, and I trust everybody on this call will as well.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Really enjoyed it.
Always fun to chat with you, Danny.
So, same, Richard. It was great.
All right. For more information, you can check out our website, recastsoftware.com. Reminder, you can download some assets on your screen right now if any of those catch your interest. And finally, the giveaway. Reminder, we're giving away 4 $100 gift cards. We're not going to pull the names out of the hat right here live and call people out, but we will be sending you emails shortly. So please check your inboxes. 4 of you will be receiving those gift cards via email. So please watch. All right. Thank you all for joining us, everybody who joined us on this webinar. Again, Richard, Danny, thank you very much. Look forward to doing this again sometime soon.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks.